therapeutic options are fairly limited. They're limited to two classes of drugs currently, the cholinesterase inhibitors, which may be familiar to some of you. Cholinesterase inhibitors have been on the PBS since the early 2000s. It's probably at least 20 years since donepezil was first marketed and received PBS approval. The three agents that are available, there's really nothing to choose between them in terms of their efficacy. The only way in which they differ really is some minor differences in their side effect profile and in how they're presented. Donepezil, for example, is a tablet. Galantamine is a capsule, and rivastigmine, they developed a transdermal delivery system largely because the oral agent was really very poorly tolerated for gastrointestinal reasons. These drugs are not approved for other types of dementia, and that's simply because they haven't been demonstrated through large phase 3 randomized controlled trials to be useful in other dementias. That's not to say that they may not be useful, but the way the world works is that the research follows the money, and if 70% of the market is in Alzheimer's disease, you're not going to bother to do a 2,000 patient trial in a rare form of dementia to demonstrate that your drug works, because the costs of doing the trial outweighs the profit that you're likely to make from doing the study. Our PBS criteria approve the drugs only for people who have an MMSE, a mini mental state examination score of 10 or greater, and only in circumstances where the diagnosis has been confirmed by a non-GP specialist. It doesn't specify that it has to be a neurologist or a geriatrician. According to the letter of the law, the PBS could be diagnosed by an orthopedic surgeon, but as long as it's not a GP is the PBS wording. Having said all this, the PBS no longer has large a restriction as it was, because both donepezil and galantamine are now off patent and are available quite cheaply or affordably on a private script. Somewhere between $20 and $25 if you shop around will give you a private script of either of these cognitive enhancer drugs. The restrictions on Memantine are somewhat different, but again, it needs to be dementia due to an Alzheimer's disease diagnosis with a much narrower MMSE range of between 10 and 14. And the PBS restrictions restrict you to prescribing one class of drug or the other. The PBS won't subsidise at the same time a cholinesterase inhibitor and Memantine. So in practice, Memantine tends to be referred for people with more advanced disease as their function declines. But again, Memantine's now also out of patent and is competitive with the cholinesterase inhibitors on cost. So one strategy would be to prescribe one agent on the PBS and the alternative on a private script. So those are the things that we currently have available. They're of limited benefit. They provide symptomatic improvement only, and it tends to be temporary. This graph here is taken from one of the drug company pivotal studies, or review of pivotal studies on the cholinesterase inhibitors. And when the data is presented like this, it looks quite encouraging. This is measured using a tool called the ADAS-Cog. I think in the days when this review was done, the ADAS-Cog was scored out of 70. There's different versions of it, but you can see when you start a cholinesterase inhibitor, you might get a 2-point improvement on a 70-point scale, whereas people who are prescribed placebo over the same period of time will decline by about 2 points. So there's about a 4-point difference on a 70-point scale in this instance between people treated with active drug versus people treated with placebo. 4 points on the ADAS is a clinically meaningful effect. And if you were to convert that change on the MMSE, it would be equivalent to about 2 points, which is also clinically meaningful and usually noticeable, if not by the patient, but by the people who are looking after them at home. What I want to flag, though, is that this is what the drug companies like to show us, which is from baseline and 24 weeks of exposure to study drug. They're not telling you the full story in this, because if you extrapolate the graphs out beyond the 36-week or the 24-week mark, you'll see that the effects rapidly have a decrement beyond the 12-month stage, and most people who are prescribed a cholinesterase inhibitor beyond the 12-month mark will have decreased their cognitive performance below baseline once again, and then a process of decline will kick in once more, though you'll see over 36 months or 3 years in this graph that there's still a significant difference between people who remain on cholinesterase inhibitors for a prolonged period of time and people who have never had exposure to them.